The following is a conversation with Tom Welke. Tom is partner and VP of RSM Solutions, Inc., a full-service recruiting firm. Tom serves as trusted staffing advisor for his hiring manager clients, who are primarily chief information officers, vice presidents, and directors. In this episode, we chat about Tom's client advocate recruiting philosophy and about his proven approach to finding A-player candidates in the technology space. If you enjoy this, please like and subscribe. And now, my conversation with Tom Welke.
Hey, Tom. Welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here, Paul. Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate that very much.
You're very welcome. It's totally my pleasure and my honor. So, for those of us who don't know you, what's your story?
So, I come from the tech sector in the mid-'90s and started in the the precursor of the dot-com era, and then through that 1995 through, through past 2000. And then for the last 19 years or so, I've been recruiting. So my story really is I'm the antithesis of the typical recruiter, and I'm sure many of your listeners are aware of what I'm gonna say. There are people in the recruiting business that are what I call churn 'em and burn 'ems, and what they'll do is they'll churn as much as they can to make as much money as they can as fast as they can. And if a client has an issue with a candidate, well, sorry, it's not my problem. Same thing from the candidate side is, sometimes a candidate will talk to a recruiter, they'll say all the right words and say all the right things, and then lo and behold, it's crickets, and that you never hear from that person again, and you essentially get ghosted. I'm the antithesis of that, and that if you reach out to me, I'm going to respond. It may not be with a whole lot of information or what you want to hear, but I'll at least respond with, hey, I haven't gotten any feedback yet. Feel free to check back. I'll always respond. And from the client end, I'm far more focused in on what I call a low failure rate as opposed to a high fill rate. And most of the CIOs, VPs, directors, managers that are listening to this podcast will know exactly what I'm talking about when I say failure rate. I'm abundantly sure you've had the flip side of this, where you've had somebody come to you as a recruiter and say, oh, my goodness gracious, Paul, this .NET developer is just going to knock your socks off. He's the best thing that ever happened. You're going to dance the samba. You're so happy when you talk to this person. And then you talk to the person, and they're not even close. So I actually know what a good .NET developer looks like. Like I said, about 19 years of recruiting, and if you were to see my non-existent hairline, you'd see that that experience has taken its toll. But I focus more so on a low failure rate as opposed to a high fill rate. When I send a candidate over to a hiring manager, you're going to get what I call the good, the bad, and the ugly. And every candidate has some good, some bad, and some potential ugly. It doesn't mean you don't talk to them. It just means you're going to know a whole lot more about them from me before you pick up the phone and talk to them.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing, because that's not. I mean, what percentage of recruiters out there kind of take your approach, do you think? Because you're like a diamond in the rough as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it's odd to hear. It's odd because it's very easy. There are extremely low barriers to entry into recruiting. Mm-hmm. What I call extremely high barriers to success. Most of my time is spent actually talking to people like yourself, Paul, people at director, management, senior level IT space. So I take those relationships really seriously. Most of my relationships have lasted in some cases 10, 15, in some cases, way past when I started recruiting, actually, back to those .com days. So I take those seriously, and that's where that low failure rate really comes in, and that I get most, if not all, my business through referral or repeat. I rarely ever cold call. I used to way back, but if you've heard my voice on a voicemail, if you're anyone listening to this, if you've heard my voice on a voicemail, chances are it's because I know somebody that you know,
right,
or I was referred to you by somebody that you know. So to answer your question, that effort to build a relationship, that takes time. It takes effort. It takes cuts and scrapes and bruises. It takes time. And I don't think there's a lot of people in my space that bother to take the time, because the ROI on that time sometimes takes a while takes a while. Now, I don't look at my relationships from an ROI point of view,
right.
And I think a lot of people in my seat do. And that's where things kind of start to go off course, because if you're looking at every opportunity from an ROI perspective, what am I going to get out of this perspective, you probably should be in another line of business, like try selling, go into commodities, or go into stock trading or something along those lines, because that's going to be probably a better suit for you.
Right. Wow. Yes. That's interesting. So, yeah, we'll talk about ROI in a minute, but it sounds like it's at the not just the relationship level, but the reputation level and the network level, even. Interesting. Okay, cool. So this is the Communicating Value podcast. I'm going to ask you the foundational question. Tom Welke, true or false, communicating value is hard?
I think that it's a very, very interesting question, because I think there's two sides to that coin, right? You and I have both been on opportunities, or have worked on opportunities where the organizational structure make it hard to communicate value. There are organizations, and there are people listening to this podcast that maybe are part of organizations where, hey, I've really tried to push through this SAP upgrade, or I've really tried to push through some BI work, because man, that has a ton of value, right? Let's look at the data visualization piece with like Power BI, for example. Lots of value with Power BI, right? You can visualize your data. You can all sorts of pretty graphs and those kinds of things. There are some organizations where communicating that value is really, really easy, right? You can talk to your CFO. You can work with your chief marketing officer, your VP of sales and marketing, let's say, even up to the CEO, and they're going to get it, right? They're going to be like, oh, yeah, why aren't we doing this? We should be doing this. This truly is something of value to us. Right. There are other organizations out there, and there are directors of IT that are very, very dear friends of mine that work at, I'm not going to name names or name organizations, but there are organizations that have a really difficult time translating that value, because that organizational structure makes it hard. There are organizations that, I'll look at it from an HR and recruiting standpoint. There are HR departments, and I'm abundantly sure, again, there's probably people listening to this podcast that are saying this, that are shaking their heads up and down when I say this. There are HR departments that make communicating value hard, that make communication within your organization, whether it has a value component or not, makes communication hard, because they're so focused on people's feelings and emotions that it clouds the whole ability to speak freely with one another, in terms of, you and I both have been a part of this, Paul, where you'll be in a meeting, and depending on an organization, there'll be an idea floated, and in your head you're saying, oh my God, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life, right? Now, there's some organizations that are freely, if this is a stupid idea, let me know, right? There's other organizations that are far more difficult to communicate that to, this idea stinks, because of too many barriers to that free and open communication. And you know this too. Communicating value is a process. It's not just something where Bob knocks on your cubicle, and you talk to Bob, and Bob says, "Hey, I got something that has a lot of value," and Paul sits and listens to Bob. It doesn't happen that way. It's not like, "Hey, I got a great idea that has value." It's a process. It's like, we've been trying to solve this business problem, right? Let's say it's a particular product line that has a really good margin on it, but you're just not able to break into a specific market, let's say. But you have an idea in terms of how to pave that way. Maybe there's a technology that'll help you do that. Maybe you've talked to Sam in sales, and Sam has said, hey, it'd be great if we could target GE with this particular product because I know who they're using as a supplier. Our product is less expensive than that company that GE is using, but our margins are so high. Why aren't we pursuing GE? And he's got an idea of, I know GE uses this for procurement. I'm willing to bet if we were able to pop ourselves into that procurement hub, we could probably do it. Now there's hoops, and like anything else, there's hoops to go through that. But I'm gonna see what we can do to get in that. That's a process where Sam talks to Bob, Bob talks to Paul, Bob, and Sam get together on a Friday afternoon to discuss how to do this. And sometimes it's a process, right? It's like, okay, we got to follow this paperwork, we got to go through all this, but we already have a system that can do most of this from a technology point of view. We just need to build a bridge, and that shouldn't take that long. So that takes a process. It's a process to communicate that value. So long-winded answer to, it depends on the organization. I think some organizations make communicating value hard.
Right. Yeah, and that reminds me, the process, the steps, and you talked about the audience, right? So it's part of the process that takes time is identifying the audience who's going to judge value, and it becomes a lot easier if everyone in the audience is singing the same song about value. Where are we going to measure it? What's it going to look like? What will be, what's the threshold below which it's not worth investing at all? In, like the GE example, investing in trying to get into GE. And if you don't do that homework, you might have a win, in your head or on your team or in your department, but somebody outside who takes a look to that, we don't care about that. Right? Exactly.
And that, you bring up a really good point when it comes to audience. And I think so often in the IT space, we come across people who are a little bit too not afraid of failure, but they are internally, like they have an internal locus of control as opposed to an external one, where your internal locus of control means that if something goes wrong, it's because of me, right? External locus of control is everything goes wrong because it's Bob. And there needs to be a healthy balance between the two. And I think so often you have people from an IT standpoint that have that internal locus of control that they don't want to talk to Jeff, let's say, or David or Rick, who's in marketing, sales, business development, because, well, what if David thinks this sucks? I don't want to do that. When in actuality, it's that first idea that stinks that breeds into something else, and brings into something else, and breeds into something else. So, to your point, I think it comes down to, just like you said, knowing your audience, but also not being afraid to know that, okay, you're probably going to fail. There's probably going to be someplace where you trip along the way. Don't be afraid of that tripping. And if you're in an organization, like I said, there's organizations that make it hard to communicate value. If you're in an organization, and there's people probably listening to this shaking their head, that you're going to trip, but that organization, let's say it's HR, let's say it's operations, let's say it's finance, are going to look at you and say, you idiot, you see, I told you you'd fail, and look, there you got that skin on your knee, and now what are we going to do? There's organizations that'll take a look at that and say, hey, get up, we're on our route, or we're on our way. I can help you get where you need to go. We're going to trip. You're going to cut your knee as you go along that way.
Right. It's kind of like shots on goal in a soccer game. If you had a soccer team where every shot had to be, a winner, and no one would want to shoot because
right. Exactly.
Okay. Good. That's a great discussion. So I've got a couple of questions for you here. So first one is, what do you think are some of the most common concerns that individuals with whom you work, things that they come across when hiring, things that keep them up at night that
Sure.
Are concerns?
Sure. There's a couple, and I'm willing to bet that you probably Paul you've hired in the past, and you probably have had these same I call them Malox moments, where it's like, where's your Malox, because I think you might need it. I think the concern really is, how much Malox am I going to take? Because every right now is a spectacular time to be talking about this, because there is a large amount of candidate flow. I'll give you some real-time data, some real-time information as we're talking here. I posted a .NET role for one of my most important clients in Chicago just last night. This would have been maybe 6 or 7 o'clock at night. As of, what's the time right now? As of this hour, there are 19 candidates that have applied. Just in that amount of time. Now, here's what keeps people up at night, is that you will see companies and people in my seat and companies in my seat, and I think most of the people who are listening to this know exactly what I'm talking about, that will shoot a lot of these resumes to you as a hiring manager and say, here, what do you think? Ooh, he's got that in his background. Oh, look at this. He's got that thing called MVC. I have no idea what MVC is, but it's got it. See, it's there. There's something else, C pound, or is that C? There's a little hash sign next to it. C pound, C hash.
Sure.
You know what I'm getting at. Where you're going to see people who have no earthly idea what C# is. They have no idea what stored procedures are. They have no idea what MVC is. But they're shooting resumes to that particular hiring manager or HR. You have no confidence,
right,
in terms of that kind of behavior. So what keeps people up at night, I think, is two things. One, a company will have an established vendor network that have gone through all the HR processes. And I'm not trying to slam HR in this conversation. So I know I've used HR a couple times in this conversation. I'm not trying to slam them by any stretch of the imagination. They have an extremely difficult job. But you will have vendors go through all of that process, right, of becoming an approved vendor. They're on their approved vendor list. They've been approved for pricing and all that other stuff. But if you are at a race to the bottom in terms of price and margin, you're going to get crap. And I think most people realize this. But again, this is that value thing, right, where some organizations make it hard to communicate value. That approved vendor process, that a lot of organizations go through, that vendor portal. I'm sure there's a lot of companies that are familiar with vendor portals, where someone in my seat has to go through a ton of hoops, and they're basically saying, okay, I'm going to spend a lot of money and spend a lot of time, make no money. Okay, you're going to get crap. And I think that keeps a lot of people up at night. The second thing is every hiring decision, especially now, because like I said, we are seeing an abundance of candidates in the last, since that .NET role is a classic example. There is an abundance of candidates, but that 80-20 rule is still in play. And you know that 80-20 rule, Paul, where there's 20% of the candidates or 20% of your team, let's say, create about 80% of the value. The bottom 80% create about 20%. And you know what I mean when I say that. And a lot of people are probably shaking their heads saying, yep, I know who my A players are. I absolutely know who my A players are, and I know what they look like.
Right.
The thing that keeps people up at night is, am I going to get an A player, or am I going to get a C or D player? You can interview the snot out of somebody, right? You can go through 3 or 4 rounds of interviews, but you're still never 100% sure if you got yourself an A player, your next star, or your next flop. So I think those are the two things that keep people up at night. And I'm sure that you have interesting stories along that line as well.
Absolutely. And I wanted to catch shift for you, Tom, for your career, your life. This is kind of a variation of who are your heroes question. But who has been favorite boss, keep their name anonymous, but, tell me about your favorite boss or one of your favorite bosses and how they helped.
Sure. I'll actually name him.
Okay.
His name is Chris Golick.
Okay.
Not the guy from ESPN, but so Chris Golick used to be not a direct report to Jack Welch at GE, but he was at GE when Jack Welch was running GE. So he was a kind of a director level guy at GE Plastics when Welch was at Plastics. He left GE Plastics, worked at DuPont for a while, and then he started a company called SupplyBase.
Yeah.
And SupplyBase was during that precursor to the dot-com days, so like 97, 98.
Mm-hmm.
And I reached out to him, and it was on a lark. It was like, hey, this guy seems really kind of neat. And it was one of those kinds of things where this was the precursor of the internet, so there were very few job sites out there. So basically, you didn't have an amalgamator like an Indeed, So you would look at companies that you had an interest in, and oftentimes you saw an email address. Now that isn't as popular as it was back in 97, 96, right around that time. You log into the internet. Remember dial-up where you do the dialing, and you hear you get like you'd be lucky to be able to load a web page in like 5 minutes or something like that.
Right.
Well, it was right around that time. So at the time, I had a real interest in the manufacturing space. I had spent a few years working for Thomas Publishing and just I'm making a long story because it actually paints a picture as to why he's my favorite. So I was selling ad space for Thomas Publishing and Thomas Register for a while. And then what I did is I thought, I'm just going to search on this internet thing to see if there's other companies that are kind of breaking the mold a little bit and, dealing in the manufacturing space, but on the internet. SupplyBase was one of the companies that came up. At the time, you also had PlasticsNet. You had a couple. IndustryNet was kind of in its infancy at that time. Free Markets was in its infancy at that time. So I reached out to Chris, and lo and behold, he responded. And he's like, I'm not sure if we really are looking at the time, but you have a background that's really interesting to me. Well, one thing led to another, and one thing that Chris taught me is the value of MPOs, not doing MPOs. So he hired me, and we ended up actually building a pretty interesting company. Sold it to I2 Technologies back in 2000. I wasn't involved in the sale, but it was significant at the time. But one of the things he taught me, and one of the things that I've carried with me, is that not just doing MPOs, but valuing those MBOs. Why are you doing
MBOs.
Task A, B, or C? If Task A, B, or C has value, that's great. Yeah, MBOs, management by objectives. So, and he actually got that from the GE Plastics, which was, Jack Welch's claim to fame back, if you've ever read the book Jack, he talks about not just doing your MBOs, but valuing them as an organization. If you're working on a project, it may have value, right? But is it the right kind of value in terms of dollar value, let's say, or does it have a bottom line effect in terms of profit margin? Is this going to make us number one or number two in this business segment? If it is, great. If it's not, why are we doing it? So it helped me to understand that you can get involved in tasks that do have value to them, right? But is it the right value? And that's probably the biggest thing he taught me was not just doing things for the sake of doing them, because everything you do there's a reason for it, but is it the right value for where we want to go as an organization? Is it going to help us be number one or number two in that business segment? If it is, fantastic. If it isn't, why are you doing it?
Right. It's kind of a portfolio approach to, whenever you have a capacity that's smaller than the available options, it could be any kind of investment. An MBO represents an investment.
Right.
Yeah. And so the portfolio approach assumes or not dictates, but it's critical that you can compare these investments side by side, and that you can compare MBOs side by side, so that you can pick the ones that score the best in terms of alignment to strategy, leverage, other criteria. But so many people who are leading an organization, they still have one-off, investment options that they just can't compare to the next one, because there's no normalization. Yeah. That's very interesting. Awesome. Thank you for that. Yeah. So, how about this one? What are your thoughts on the biggest challenges that the C-suite, VPs, director levels, IT execs, what are the biggest challenges they're going to face in the next, let's say, 2 to 5 years?
I think that's a really good question. And I think a lot of people listening to this are going to probably shake their head a little bit in the affirmative, at least I hope, is things are getting more complex, not less. Apple came out today with its 5G phone, right? Mm-hmm. I'm willing to bet there are people who are going to knock on your door and say, "Hey, I got to get one of these 5G things. I heard it's supposed to be really, really cool." And then they say, "Yeah, I heard it too." And then 7 people are lining up behind that person saying, "I want 5G," right? 5G isn't quite ready yet. It's not really quite. It's really not quite there yet. The phones are, but the piping to get you there isn't. So you, as an IT leader, have to communicate that to somebody who's emotionally attached, right? Emotionally attached to a device. They're like, "I gotta have this. Oh my God, did you see this thing? Oh, it looks so cool." And what is that going to do, right? I think the challenge is going to be, you're going to have this guy, right? You're going to order the new iPhone for Sam in sales, let's say. Sam's going to get this iPhone. He's going to look at it. He's going to stare at it. He's going, "Oh my God, this thing's so cool." And then he's going to turn it on, and he's going to call the IT department. He says, "How come I can't get this? I can't get my phone to work. Why don't we have the 5G thing, right?" And you're going to say to Sam, "Remember when we ordered this? I said the pipe isn't there yet. Remember I talked to you about a pipe, and you were just rattling on and on about this phone. We're not there yet." So that's just one small example of, I think, what a lot of IT leaders are dealing with right now, is that things are going to get more complex, not less, over the next several years. 5G isn't there yet, right? RPA and AI and machine learning, all really hot topics, right? Again, you're probably going to have somebody from, let's say, finance come to you and say, "Hey, Paul, guess what? I went to this conference and we talked about robotic process automation and artificial intelligence. Oh my God, we got to do this thing. It's going to be so cool." And they're all giddy. They're grinning from ear to ear more than they've ever seen them grin before. Now, what you're going to say to that guy is, let's say his name is Fred. You're going to say, "Fred, I get you. Yep, RPA and AI." And you don't want to be a killjoy, right? You don't want to be like, "Okay, Fred, hold on to your undies. It's going to be just fine." But you don't want to be a killjoy, but you have to be realistic too. RPA, AI, and machine learning learn from your data. If your data and processes stink, RPA, AI, and machine learning just allows you to do really, really stupid things really, really fast. Now, that's more complex. Doesn't mean you don't do it, right? Doesn't mean you don't talk to Fred and you say, "Okay, Fred, in order for us to do RPA right, first we need to find a replicatable process." And never really changes that much in terms of its data source, in terms of its process, and in terms of its result. Let's pick a couple that we know hardly ever change. Right. And he's going to say, well, there's an accounts payable process. Okay, great, fantastic. Let's look for an accounts payable process, and let's see if we can RPA that. Mm-hmm. maybe mix in a little AI, to what's now being called, kind of an advanced portion of RPA, where you can kind of blend AI and RPA. It starts to learn a little bit. So you start with something and you think, okay, this is great. This is going to show value. And then they try to make this giant leap to saying, okay, let's RPA our entire help desk process. Whoa, back trolley up. Let's do password resets. And they're saying, oh, that's too small. Password resets, come on. That's JV. That's JV, man. We're in varsity. And I think that is going to be the hardest thing to do over the next few years, because things are going to get more complex, not less. Organizations are going to have people with technology in their pocket that rivals the space shuttle from way back. You have a lot of power in people's hands that don't necessarily know what they're dealing with. It's like giving a Ferrari to a 16-year-old. Can a 16-year-old drive a Ferrari? Yeah. But I think there's a lot of people listening to this podcast that may have 16-year-olds that say, not on your life.
Right. Wow. That's great. Yeah, more complexity. I think I heard the stat. I think both McKinsey and Gartner made a comment about AI ML, and that 50%, like for the Fortune 1000, right? They've been, running a lot of experiments, doing a lot of pilots, and both Gartner and McKinsey say that 50% of those were complete boondoggles.
Mm-hmm.
And
right.
Yeah, and yeah, it's going to get worse, not simpler in the next 2 to 5 years. I like that.
And I think
That's
that
great.
need for someone in my seat, and I'm not trying to bloat by any stretch of the imagination, but the need for someone in my seat that can help that person, that hiring manager, in terms of hiring, not from a perspective of what can I sell you today, but hiring from a perspective of, again, reduction of resource risk, low failure rate, as opposed to high fill rate. Right. That's going to be needed more and more and more and more and more.
Exactly, because technology is becoming a higher and higher leverage role and function.
Right.
Yeah. That's great. Well, this has been great, Tom. Before we end, I want to ask you, so if people out there want to get a hold of you, how can they do that?
My office number, 877-776-0020, goes right to my desk. This annoys my spouse a little bit every once in a while, but I actually do take calls closer to 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. So, and on the weekends as well. We won't keep that a secret. But that's probably the best way to get me. Email always works. tomwelke at rsmsolutionsinc.com. I'm not your RSM US, so I don't want to get the two confused. If I was VP and partner at RSM US, I would probably be on a beach in Bahamas right now.
Right.
But if it was email works, phone works. It's interestingly enough, it is far better for us to talk over the phone than it is over email, because right now there's so much content to share in terms of that it gets kind of lost in a zillion emails. It's far better to spend 10 or 15 minutes on the phone than to spend 2 hours exchanging email and reading email where maybe not much of it is relevant to what you specifically as a hiring manager need. I'll go through the work of, I actually write my own job descriptions, and I have for a long time now. So I'll go through the work of putting together a job description as opposed to you sharing one with me. You feel free to share one with me, that's fine. But I'm going to talk to you for 10 or 15 minutes in terms of, okay, what do we really need here? Don't give me that laundry list of a zillion things. And again, trouble communicating value, look at your job descriptions. That might be a hint in terms of if your job description have 7 zillion things on it, really? You need all those things? Is that's a key signal right there in terms of value and communicating that value. So I'll spend 10 or 15 minutes with you on the phone, maybe 20, sometimes up to 30, depending on how much time you want to spend. And I'll get into the gritty of what you really need, what you really want, and really, really most importantly, what creates a fit for you. If anyone on this podcast wants to go to Indeed.com, type in RSM Solutions Inc. You'll see my job descriptions. I like to add humor to them, so if you do get a chuckle, it is designed to make you laugh. And I focus in on there. What makes a fit here? And most everybody on this podcast knows exactly in their organizations, not just from a technical side, but from a soft skill side, what creates a fit here. I pay a lot of attention to that. So I start from the job description process. I have access to every resume on Indeed, so I purchase a subscription every year for this. So if someone is needing to help, in terms of what's realistically available, again, go to our previous discussion of value. This is value, right?
Right.
That ability to share with somebody in real time, here's what's available. Okay, you want this, these 17 other things, and if they can dance on the head of a pin, that's great. Let's plug all that into Indeed. Right. Okay, there's 3 people in the entire country that have that. I think I might need to broaden my scope a little bit. I can do that with anybody in terms of sharing. I'll just share my screen, and you'll see exactly what I'm seeing in terms of what's realistically available. I share with you what's realistic in terms of comp numbers. If somebody tells me, hey, we want to spend $82,000 on this role when in actuality the market says 110, you can tell me 82.5. That's fine. But I'm going to share with you what's realistically available. It may be out of your price point. But again, don't scream at me. This is what the market's telling us. I can tell that candidate, okay, we can go up to 82.5 when they really want 95, let's say. Maybe they'll take 82.5. But guess what? Give it about 2 months, they're going to bail. They're going to bail because the first time they get somebody that said that, they may be the nicest guy on the planet, right? But they're going to bail. So I'll share with you what's realistic available. So long-winded answer to email, but phone works a lot better. That 877-776-0020.
Got it. So, but that's interesting because I've seen more than one company who had some kind of, labor analytics, AI dashboard tool that they invested in to help them do what you do for your clients in the first phone call.
I do that just as part of what I do. So it's just again, value add that I do for if I work on a role with you, and this is up to you whether you want me to share this information with you. You got to tell me, hey, yeah, I'd like to do that, and I'll be happy to share my screen. It's just part of the value that I bring to the table.
That's amazing. Wow. Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much, Tom, for coming on the show.
It's my pleasure. You got it.